Hi, this is Doug Renstrom. Welcome to this demo on exploring Cloud Datastore. In this demo, we will show you how Datastore works. We will create entities using the console, then query them using GQL. We will also show you how queries must be supported by an index. To do this, we will create an App Engine application, create Cloud Datastore entities. Finally, we'll query the data store. First, let's create an App Engine application. Notice I'm in my App Dev Demos project, and I'll go to Products and Services and choose App Engine. App Engine was GCP's first product, and Cloud Datastore used to be called the Datastore and was part of an App Engine application. Even though Cloud Datastore is now a separate top-level product on GCP, the dependency on creating an App Engine application still remains. Let's create our first application. Notice in App Engine we can choose any language we like. It doesn't really matter for this demo which language we choose, so we'll just choose Node.js. For our region, we'll choose US Central 1 and click Next. This is preparing our App Engine application, and it's also building our back-end Datastore database. Okay, at this point, the App Engine application has been created. Notice there's a tutorial that starts up over here. We don't need the tutorial for this demo, so let's just cancel it. Okay, let's create some entities. From Products and Services, we'll choose Datastore. We have no entities at this point, so we need to create one, and we'll create a couple president entities. So the kind is president. That would be kind of equivalent to a table inside a relational database, but we don't have to define a schema when we create entities in Datastore. All we do is define properties, and properties have data types and values. So let's start with the first president. So first name was George. Last name Washington. Date of birth is a date time value, and George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732. And we don't know what time he was born, or I don't know what time he was born. So we'll set that to all zeros and save it. George Washington started being president. So let's say we'll set a start year and an end year. So start year is an integer, and he began his presidency in 1789, and his end year was 1797. We to create that first entity, and let's do a couple more. So we'll create another entity. Again, it will be a president. This time we'll add Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln began his presidency in 1861. And he ended his presidency in 1865. And finally, Abraham Lincoln was born on February 22nd, 1809. And hit save. I'll pause the video while I create a couple more entities. Okay, I've added some presidents and I've just picked a few so I can show you how to do some querying in Google Cloud Datastore. Now, first of all, I have more than one George. So we have George Washington and George Bush and the other George Bush. And also with the Bushes, we have to differentiate between them. So George Bush, the second president, he has a middle initial, which is set to W. And the first George Bush, we gave him a middle initials property, not middle initial, and his middle initials were H and W. Washington and Lincoln, they had no middle initial. So if you click on Washington, we didn't create a middle initial property and set it to null. In the case of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, there is just not a middle initial property. Also, every president has a start year, and every president but one here has an end year. At least at the time of this recording, there was no end year for Donald Trump. Now let's take a look at how we will query these entities. Okay, now let's do some simple querying. First of all, from right here in the UI, let's click on the Filter Entities button. And let's do a filter where first name is a string that is equal to George. And apply the filter there. So now we get the three Georges, George Washington and Bush. Let's clear that filter. Now let's filter all the presidents whose start year is an integer that is less than the year 2000. Click Apply Filters and we'll see George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and the first George Bush get returned. Now let's try to filter out based on middle initial. Let's say we wanted to see all the presidents that had no middle initial. Let's clear these filters and then create a filter on middle initial is null. And let's see what we got back. Apply filters. So notice it says no entities match this query. And I wanted to do that just so you can understand. We didn't give Abraham Lincoln and George Washington a middle initial property and then set the value to null. They just have no middle initial property whatsoever. So you can't filter them out by specifying middle initial as null. Now similarly, let's clear the filters again. We would not be able to say end year is null and get Donald Trump back. Because again, there is no, if we wanted to be able to do something like that, we could, I guess, give Donald Trump an end year, but set the value to say -1, indicating that there is no end year at this point. But at this point in time, he has no end year property. Therefore, you can't filter him out based on that value. Okay, so let's get clear filters again. Notice in this case, I've been filtering things by entity. There's also a query language called GQL that you can use to query entities in Datastore as well. So let's see how that works. So very similar to SQL you might use in a relational database. So we could say select star from president, which is our kind. So let's run that query. And we should get all the presidents back. Or we could say select star from president where first name equals George. And run that, and we should only get our Georges back. And let's say we only wanted to get George W. Bush. We could say select star from presidents where first name equals George and last name, or I'm sorry, and middle initial equals W. Let's give that a try. And that just returns George W. Bush. Okay, let's remove this and here and run this query again. So now we've selected all the presidents where first name equals George. Now let's say I want to do this. I want to say first name equal George and end year equals 1797. Let's run that query and see what happens. Okay, so that returned George Washington back to us. So he was the one president with the first name George, and his end year was 1797. But let's say I wanted to do something a little different. I want to see first name equal George, and I want to see end year is less than 2000. And let's run that query. And you notice here we get an error. Your data store does not have a composite index required for this query. So we're able to do first name equals George and end year equals 1797. We're not allowed to do first year equals George and end year is less than 2000. Oddly enough, though, we would be allowed to do select star from presidents where end year is less than 2000. So that returned all of our values there. So as it turns out, by default, all data store properties are indexed, and we can query against multiple properties automatically as long as if we're seeing if multiple properties are equal to certain values. But when we want to do a query where we're querying multiple values and we want to do things like property is less than or greater than and so on, then we have to create a custom composite index. So that's what we're going to have to do next in order to get this query to work. Remember, what we're trying to do is what I want to be able to query this. Select star from president where first name equals George and end year equals 2000. Right? So let's figure out how we can fix that. Okay, to create the indexes, let's start up Google Cloud Shell, and we can do it from there. Okay, I'm going to need to create a file called index.yaml where I'm going to define my indexes, and then we'll use that file to build the indexes in Datastore. So we can use nano to do that. So we'll just type nano space index.yaml. That'll open up a text editor, and we'll just paste in the values for that file. So notice I'm creating some indexes. I'm going to index the president kind, and then here I'm specifying the properties that I want to index. So I'm going to index first name in ascending order, and end year I'm going to index in descending order. So let's save that file, and we'll use it to create our indexes. Now that we have the file created, we'll use the command gcloud datastore, create indexes, and then the name of our file to create the indexes. Okay, that was created. Now it will take a little while for those indexes to be ready. So if we go back to Datastore and click indexes, we see this is creating. So we got to give that a little bit of time. So as soon as that's done, we'll go back to our query and see if it works. Okay, it says here that our index has been created and its status is serving. So let's go back to our entities and back to that query that failed before. Remember, we're trying to run select star from president where first name equals George and end year is less than 0. If we run it this time, then we see the query works. Okay. In this demo, we've seen how to build a Google Cloud Data Store, how to add entities to it. We've talked a little bit about what entities are and how they're created, and we've seen how to filter entities and query entities with Google Query Language. Finally, we saw how to create a custom index that will allow us to query Google Data Store entities with complex queries. Hope you enjoyed the demo. This is Doug Renstrom.